The colonel thought it was just another excuse, a flimsy reason to skip a fitness test. He mocked her in front of the entire formation, loud enough for every soldier to hear. But when she pulled back her sleeve, silence hit harder than any order he had ever given. Because the scars she revealed didn't just speak, they roared with the weight of war. You're watching the Scape, where hidden legends come alive. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? The morning at Fort Braddock was anything but quiet. 200 soldiers stood in formation on the parade field, boots lined in sharp rows, the sun glinting off canteens and dog tags. It was fitness assessment day, the kind of day that measured not just endurance, but pride. Officers and NCOs circled the formation like hawks, clipboards ready. At the center of it all, Colonel James Whitmore stood like a statue of authority. 6'2", his uniform ironed to perfection, his chest full of ribbons that caught the morning light. He had built his reputation on toughness, never lowering the standard, never accepting excuses. Listen up. His voice boomed across the field, silencing the low murmur of soldiers. This test is simple. Push-ups, sit-ups, a run. No exceptions. Every soldier here will complete it because that's what wearing this uniform means. You want to serve? You meet the standard. No excuses. Heads nodded. A few grins spread among the ranks. This was Whitmore's stage, and he knew it. Near the back row stood Specialist Lena Hart, small compared to those around her, a desk clerk in most people's eyes. She had submitted a profile weeks ago, approved by the medical board, that allowed her a modification. Nothing dramatic, just recognition that her body couldn't perform a certain movement anymore. When Whitmore's gaze found her, the energy shifted. He paused, then marched directly toward her. You, Hart. His tone cut through the field like a blade. You're the one trying to skip push-ups? The question wasn't really a question. It was a challenge. Yes, sir. Medical profile permits alternate event. A ripple of laughter broke out from the formation. Someone muttered, paperwork injury, and another chuckled under his breath. Whitmore smirked, sensing the crowd with him. Medical profile, he repeated. You mean an excuse? He raised his voice, making sure every soldier could hear. You've been behind a desk too long, Specialist. Out here, we don't hide.
But Lena didn't move, didn't speak, didn't rise to the bait. She simply looked straight ahead and waited until the noise died down. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. Sir, the profile is permanent. Whitmore leaned in, lowering his voice just enough for those nearest to hear. Permanent? At your age? Please. Then louder, for everyone. The only thing permanent here is the standard, and you're about to meet it. Drop, give me 50, right here, right now. The soldiers around her shifted, waiting for her humiliation. They expected her to stammer, to make excuses, to fail publicly. Instead, Lena reached for the cuff of her sleeve. Slowly, deliberately, she undid the first button, then the second. She began to roll the fabric back, exposing pale skin that carried lines and ridges no one expected. The laughter stopped. Long, jagged scars traced from her wrist to her elbow, puckered and uneven, the unmistakable marks of shrapnel. The kind of scars you don't get from paperwork or laziness, but from fire and steel tearing flesh apart. Whitmore froze mid-step. He knew those patterns. Every combat veteran did. The field went silent, the air thick with shock. Soldiers craned their necks, eyes wide, jaws clenched shut. Lena spoke again, her tone level, almost matter-of-fact. Right arm, limited flexion under load, nerve damage, permanent medical profile as authorized. She didn't explain more. She didn't need to. The scars spoke for her, louder than any words could. For the first time in years, Colonel Whitmore had nothing to say, and the formation, 200 soldiers strong, stood in stunned silence, realizing that the woman they'd mocked carried more proof of service on her skin than most of them ever would. For several long seconds, no one moved. The morning heat pressed down, but all anyone felt was the cold bite of silence. The soldiers who had laughed only moments earlier now stood stiff, eyes locked on the scars across Lena Hart's arm. Jagged ridges, deep as carved stone, each one a story the colonel had no right to mock. Whitmore shifted his weight, but his voice, so commanding minutes ago, didn't come. He stared at her arm like it was a battlefield report come to life. He had seen scars like those before, in field hospitals and casualty briefings, but never expected them to belong to the quiet specialist in front of him. Specialist. His voice caught. He cleared his throat, trying to steady it. But Lena cut him off, not with anger, not with defiance, but with the same calm tone as before. It doesn't matter where, sir. It matters that I'm still standing. That was when Sergeant First Class Morales, one of the senior NCOs, stepped forward. A veteran of Iraq, his sharp eyes widened at the sight. He didn't laugh. He didn't whisper. He muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the men beside him to hear. IED scars.
The words spread like a current. Those who had served downrange understood instantly. Those who hadn't felt the weight of recognition through the silence. The colonel's little joke had just been shattered by reality. But the moment didn't linger. A runner appeared from across the field, sprinting hard, voice breaking with urgency. "Medical, lane 3, obstacle course, trainee down!" The drill sergeant snapped into motion. The assessment had just become real. Soldiers hesitated, waiting for orders. Whitmore looked around, still rattled, clipboard hanging loose in his hand. Lena didn't wait. She was already moving. She stripped her jacket in one motion, tossed it aside, and ran across the gravel, boots digging deep. Her undershirt clung tight, and for the first time, more of her scars were visible, across her ribs, curling toward her back. Gasps followed her as she pushed through the line of stunned recruits. "Specialist Hart," Whitmore barked, finding his voice again. "Where the hell do you think you're—" But Morales cut him off. "Sir, she's a medic." The colonel froze. He hadn't known. Of course he hadn't. Her current records listed her as administrative support. But Morales had recognized the type, the pace, the way she moved toward crisis without hesitation. It was the gait of someone who had run into chaos before, who had carried weight heavier than a rucksack. By the time Whitmore processed it, Lena was already at lane 3. A young private lay crumpled in the dirt beside the rope wall, chest heaving shallowly, skin flushed and pale at once, a heat casualty teetering on the edge. 2 soldiers hovered nearby, unsure what to do. "Move," Lena ordered, dropping to her knees. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority that brooked no argument. She checked the private's pulse, felt the rapid, thready beat, and yanked the canteen strap off one soldier's shoulder. "Water, slow sips, get his gear off." Her hands were steady, her tone clipped, professional. She didn't have to shout. The soldiers obeyed instantly. As the vest came off, Lena tore open her own canteen, dribbling water across the trainee's lips, then over his temples, cooling the skin. "He's heat-stroking," she called over her shoulder. "I need shade, ice packs if you've got them. Move." Suddenly, the field wasn't frozen anymore. Soldiers sprinted for supplies. A litter team rushed from the aid station. The drill sergeant barked orders, echoing her calls. Whitmore arrived moments later, handing harder than he wanted to admit. He found Lena kneeling in the dirt, sweat dripping into her eyes, one hand on the private's carotid artery, the other stabilizing his airway. She worked with the kind of precision that came only from experience. "You," Whitmore began, but Morales cut him off again, standing beside him. His voice was low. "Sir, don't interrupt. She knows what she's doing." For once, the colonel didn't argue.
Minutes later, the medics arrived with gear and litter. Lena gave them a quick handover. Vitals, timeline, interventions. It was as clean a report as any field medic could hope for. They nodded, impressed, and carried the private toward the aid station. As the crowd dispersed, the colonel finally found himself face to face with her again. This time there was no smirk on his lips, no mockery in his tone, just a heavy, awkward silence. "You never said," he muttered. Lena buttoned her sleeve back down, hiding the scars once more. "Never needed to," she replied simply. He wanted to ask more. Where, when, how, but he knew better now. The scars were answer enough. Behind them, soldiers whispered to each other. No laughter now, no smirks, just quiet respect. And as the field settled back into uneasy silence, every man and woman present understood something new. Sometimes the strongest soldiers aren't the loudest, the biggest, or the fastest. Sometimes they're the ones who carry their battles etched into their skin. Silent proof that they've already fought, already bled, and still chose to stand among them. The training field never really returned to normal. The cadence calls, the laughter, even the usual background chatter had drained away, leaving only the thud of boots and the occasional barked order. But beneath it all, every soldier's mind was still back at Lane 3, replaying what they had seen. Specialist Lena Hart, moving with calm authority, scars bared, and a colonel silenced. She had gone back to the formation as if nothing had happened. Her sleeves were buttoned, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. To the casual eye, she looked like any other soldier standing in the morning sun. But to the 200 pairs of eyes around her, she was something else entirely now. Proof that the quietest uniform in the line could carry the loudest truth. Colonel Whitmore paced the perimeter again, clipboard in hand, but his stride had lost its sharp edge. The man who thrived on public speeches and mockery looked smaller somehow, each step heavy with a weight only he could feel. He gave orders still, but his voice lacked its earlier venom. His soldiers obeyed, but they weren't watching him anymore. Their glances slid back toward Lena, the way men glance at an unexpected landmark on a map, something they couldn't unsee once it appeared. When the 2-mile run began, Lena took her place like everyone else. She ran steady, her breath controlled, her face set. No one dared comment on her pace. Those who had snickered earlier found themselves deliberately avoiding her eyes, ashamed at how quickly they had joined in the colonel's laughter. It was Morales who broke the silence afterward. In the shade of the bleachers, as soldiers rehydrated and stretched, he walked up to her. His voice was low, private. "Those scars. I've seen wounds like that. Iraq, '06. Lena didn't answer right away. She kept her gaze on the horizon, the faint shimmer of heat rising off the asphalt. "Some things don't heal," she finally said. "You just learn how to carry them." Morales gave a single nod. That was enough for him. But the younger soldiers who overheard, wide-eyed privates who had never deployed, filed the words away like scripture. Whitmore lingered on the edge of it all, torn between authority and something he hadn't felt in years, doubt. He remembered a briefing, long ago, when casualty photos had crossed his desk with blacked-out names. He remembered scars that looked eerily similar, operations labeled "no casualties," but whispered about in back channels. He studied Lena from a distance, wondering how much of her file was real and how much had been scrubbed clean.
By noon, word had spread across Fort Braddock. The whispers moved faster than trucks on the perimeter road. The colonel mocked her. She showed scars, real combat scars, not training injuries, IED scars. By the time chow was served, every unit on base was buzzing with fragments of the story. Some framed it as the colonel's humiliation. Others told it as Lena's quiet triumph. All agreed on one thing. Something unforgettable had happened on that field. That evening, Lana sat alone in her small barracks room. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, but her thoughts were loud. She laid her jacket across her lap, fingers tracing the stitching as if grounding herself. She had not wanted this. Exposure, whispers, respect born from shock. She had tried for months to remain invisible, just another clerk behind a desk. But scars don't stay buried forever. Her mind drifted back, not to the colonel's mocking voice, not to the field's laughter, but to the night that had carved those lines into her skin. A convoy, a dirt road, the briefest flash of light before the sound and heat tore through everything, the ringing in her ears, the weight of another body slumped against her, the stubborn will to keep pulling tourniquets, even as her own blood soaked the sand. She remembered the helicopter, the hands that pressed down on her side, the medic who wouldn't let her close her eyes, and later, the surgeries, the weeks when every breath felt like glass. She had survived, but the survival had come with a price, a permanent reminder etched across her body, one she had spent years hiding beneath long sleeves and silence. Now, thanks to a colonel's mockery, those scars were no longer hers alone. 200 witnesses carried them in their memory, and tomorrow, the entire base would. A knock at her door pulled her back. She opened it to find Morales standing there, holding a folder. "You should see this," he said.
Inside was a report, her official profile. It had been flagged for review after the morning's incident. Word was already climbing the chain of command. Whitmore's superiors wanted answers. Why had a specialist with combat wounds been humiliated in public? Why hadn't her background been disclosed more clearly? Lena sighed. She had expected this. Exposure always came with consequences. "Whatever happens," Morales said quietly, "you should know something. Every soldier out there saw what you did. They saw you keep calm while he mocked you. They saw those scars. They'll never forget it. You changed something today." She looked at him, eyes tired but steady. "Changed what?" "The way they measure strength," he said simply. When he left, Lena closed the door and leaned against it, staring at her reflection in the small mirror. The scars beneath her sleeve burned, not from pain, but from memory. She hadn't wanted to be a symbol, but sometimes symbols chose you. And across the base, in the colonel's office, Whitmore sat alone at his desk, pen unmoving above paper. For the first time in his career, he wondered if he had built his authority on the wrong definition of strength. He had mocked her excuse. She answered without a single word. And now, every soldier on base knew which voice carried more weight. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire. What started as whispers on the training field had become a storm rolling through the barracks, the dining facility, even the motor pool. Everyone had heard it in some form. The colonel mocked her. She showed her scars, real scars. For some, it was gossip. For others, it was revelation. But for Colonel Whitmore, it was a problem with teeth. He sat at his desk long before dawn, the blinds drawn tight, a report half written in front of him.
He'd been a soldier for 30 years. He had commanded companies, battalions, and now this training regiment. He had made mistakes before, but nothing like this. Never had he felt his authority slip so publicly. Never had he seen a formation look past him and lock on to someone else. The phone on his desk buzzed. He already knew who it would be. Higher command. Colonel Whitmore, the voice on the other end said, calm but cold. We've received multiple accounts of an incident yesterday involving Specialist Hart. There will be an inquiry. Office of Special Investigations will be sending someone. Until then, you are to refrain from any contact with the specialist outside official duties. Understood? Whitmore swallowed. Understood. He hung up and stared at the report again. The ink blurred. The scars he had seen were burned into his mind. He had recognized them. That pattern. It wasn't random. It was a signature. One he had seen in class.
Across post, Lena Hart laced her boots in silence. She had known the storm was coming the moment she rolled her sleeve. She didn't regret it, not exactly, but she hated the spotlight. Soldiers watched her differently now, not with ridicule, but with reverence, with a kind of heavy silence she didn't want. They gave her space in the chow line. They lowered their voices when she walked past. Respect was supposed to feel good, but this respect was edged with pity, and she despised pity. By mid-morning, the inquiry arrived. A man in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of someone who belonged. He wore no insignia, carried no visible weapon, but every movement told trained eyes he was more than he appeared. "Specialist Hart?" he asked, as he entered the small administrative office where she was working. His tone was professional, neutral. "Agent Keller, Office of Special Investigations. I need a word." The room went silent. Clerks shifted uneasily at their desks. Lena rose, nodding. "Of course." They walked in silence until they reached a conference room. Keller closed the door, set down a slim folder, and studied her. "You understand why I'm here?" "Yes," Lena said simply. Keller opened the folder. Inside were photographs, medical diagrams, fragments of reports. He slid one across the table. It was a silhouette of a human torso, shaded areas marking wound patterns. "This was from a briefing I attended 2 years ago. A joint operation. Officially, there were no casualties. Unofficially, we knew that wasn't true. The wounds matched yours." Her jaw tightened. She didn't speak. Keller leaned back. "You don't have to confirm anything. I'm not here to drag classified history into daylight. But what happened yesterday compromised your cover. 200 witnesses saw what you carry. That changes things." For the first time, Lena broke her silence. "I asked for a simple exemption. He mocked me. I didn't want this." "I believe you. But intent doesn't erase exposure. The colonel's actions forced your hand, and now this base is buzzing with stories, half of them already speculating about special operations." He tapped the folder. "That's a problem." She folded her arms, scars hidden again beneath fabric. "So what happens now?" Keller considered her. "There are options. You can request medical retirement. You'd walk away quietly, benefits intact. Or," he paused, "you can accept reassignment. There are units that know how to use experience like yours without exposing it. Training commands, advisory roles, somewhere where you won't have to keep proving you belong." She looked down at her hands, the faint tremor she hated surfacing for a second. Retirement. The word felt like surrender. But another reassignment meant another cover, another attempt at invisibility. She was tired of invisibility. "What about him?" she asked finally. "The colonel?" Keller's expression didn't change, but his tone cooled. "There will be consequences. Security protocols exist for a reason. Publicly humiliating someone with a restricted profile is a breach. At best, he'll lose his command. At worst, he'll face formal charges." Lena nodded slowly. She hadn't wanted revenge, but she wouldn't cry over his fall either. That evening, as the sun dropped behind a tree line, Lena walked the track alone. The field was quiet now, the echoes of yesterday replaced by cicadas and wind. She remembered the look on Whitmore's face when he saw the scars, the way his certainty cracked. And she realized something. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever carried wounds unseen and been mocked for them. Tomorrow the inquiry would continue. Reports would be filed. Decisions would be made. But the soldiers who had stood on that field wouldn't remember the paperwork. They'd remember the silence that followed her sleeve rolling back. They'd remember the colonel, speechless. They'd remember that scars speak louder than words. And whether she liked it or not, Specialist Lena Hart had become their reminder. The inquiry had barely begun when the questions in Lena's own mind pulled her somewhere else entirely. She had spent years burying the memories, locking them behind layers of silence and routine. But once the scars had been exposed, the doors inside her refused to stay shut. That night, lying on her bunk, she closed her eyes, and the barracks walls dissolved into another place, another time. She was back in the valley, Afghanistan. A dirt road carved into the mountainside, the kind of road that looked harmless until it wasn't. Their convoy had moved at a crawl, vehicles grinding over gravel, every soldier tense. She rode in the second truck, headset pressed to her ears, scanning the radio for chatter. Her job was simple: keep the comms alive. She was the net between her team and the outside world. It should have been routine, but routine in that part of the world had teeth. The blast came without warning. A flash of orange-white light swallowed her vision, then a roar that seemed to split the mountain itself. The truck lifted off the ground, metal shrieking as it tore apart. Heat slammed through her body like a hammer made of fire. She remembered the sensation of being weightless, and then the crushing impact when she hit the ground. When the ringing in her ears finally dulled, the world was chaos. Shouts, gunfire, the stench of burning fuel. She tried to push herself up, but her right side wouldn't obey. Pain radiated in jagged lines down her ribs, her arm, her back. She looked down and saw blood pooling fast, seeping through her vest, trickling onto the dirt. A shape crawled toward her, a private she barely knew, face pale, eyes wide with terror. He tried to say something, but the words dissolved into a wet cough. She pressed her hand to his wound, even as her own vision blurred. Training took over. She forced her other arm to reach for a tourniquet, fingers slipping on blood. The firefight around them raged, enemy rifles cracking from the rocks above, her teammates returning fire. She remembered calling into the broken radio, her voice hoarse but steady. "Contact! Ambush! Multiple wounded! We need immediate air support!" Static fought her words, but she kept shouting, every syllable dragging more blood from her lungs. Somehow the signal got through. She never knew if it was luck or persistence, only that minutes later, the sky thundered with friendly fire from above. They survived, but survival was not clean. By the time the medevac landed, Lena was half conscious, her body riddled with shrapnel. The surgeons later told her she shouldn't have been alive when they opened her vest. Too much blood loss, too much damage. And yet, she had lived. The scars left behind weren't neat. They weren't the tidy lines of surgery. They were violent, jagged, a map of everything she endured, a map she had hidden under fabric and silence for years. Her eyes opened to the barracks ceiling once more. The hum of the air conditioner brought her back to the present, but the memories lingered. She sat up slowly, pressing a palm against her sleeve where the ridges lay beneath. She hated that the colonel had dragged those memories into the open, hated that laughter had forced her to reveal what she never intended to share. But she also knew this: the scars weren't shame, they weren't weakness, they were proof. Proof that when the fire came, she had stayed. Proof that she had kept others alive when every breath should have been her last. Tomorrow, the inquiry would write its report. Whitmore would answer for his words, and Lena would have to decide whether to stay hidden in the shadows or finally step into the role those scars had given her. Because the truth was simple: she survived what others hadn't, and survival carried responsibility. The scars were not the end of her story. They were the beginning. The inquiry lasted less than a week. On paper, word spread fast. The soldiers who had once laughed with him now avoided his gaze. Respect drained away like water through cracked stone. For all his ribbons and speeches, Whitmore would be remembered not for his decades of service, but for one morning when he mocked the wrong soldier. Lena, meanwhile, was called in on the second day. The OSI agent, Keller, asked her the same questions he had before, but this time in front of the panel. What happened? What was said? Why she rolled up her sleeve? She answered calmly, every word steady. She made no accusations. She asked for no retribution. She only told the truth. When it was over, Keller escorted her out. In the hallway, away from the others, he gave a small nod. You carried yourself well. Whatever happens next, you've earned respect that doesn't fade. But respect had never been her goal. That evening, she returned to the training field alone. The gravel still bore the faint scuffs from where she'd dropped into a plank, the place where silence had swallowed laughter. She stood there in the fading light, hands clasped behind her back, remembering the faces that had stared at her scars, not with disgust, not with pity, but with recognition. The next morning, soldiers she barely knew began greeting her differently, not with jokes or casual nods, but with quiet, deliberate respect. A corporal stopped her in the dining facility, eyes uncertain, and simply said, "Ma'am, thank you." A private held the door open, not because of rank, but because his conscience told him to. For years, Lena had hidden, her scars a secret burden. Now they were no longer hers alone. They belonged to everyone who had seen them, everyone who needed to be reminded that strength wasn't measured by clean uniforms or perfect scores. It was measured by survival, by carrying wounds and still showing up. When orders finally came, she wasn't surprised. Reassignment, a training command on the East Coast. Her combat days were behind her, but her story wasn't. She would teach now. Teach recruits who had never smelled cordite, who thought combat was a word in a manual. She would teach them what strength really looked like, not by boasting, not by yelling, but by showing the scars that spoke louder than words. On her last day at Fort Braddock, she passed the formation one final time. Soldiers who once laughed now stood straighter when she walked by. Some saluted, even though protocol didn't require it. Whitmore's office window was dark, his desk already cleared. As she reached the gate, Morales caught up with her. He handed her a small box, no larger than a deck of cards. Inside
The world outside Fort Braddock was wide and uncertain, but she no longer felt the need to hide. Her scars were no longer just reminders of what she endured. They were a voice that had silenced a colonel, reshaped a regiment, and reminded every soldier who saw them that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's carried quietly, just beneath a sleeve, waiting for the moment when truth must be shown. And as the gate closed behind her, Specialist Lena Hart walked forward, not as the clerk they thought she was, not as the soldier they mocked, but as the warrior her scars had always proven her to be.